Welcome back to RN Geek Podcast, everybody. Today we're diving deep into, well, I think you could say, a universal experience, right? Stress.
Absolutely something we all deal with.
Exactly. And, we all know what it feels like to be stressed, but the material you sent over really takes it a step further. It gets into the nitty-gritty of how stress actually impacts different parts of our lives, like for real.
It really does. It's fascinating.
So in this deep dive, we're going to kind of unpack those connections, specifically looking at the role stress plays in aging, in addiction, and in sexual health. And kind of the goal here is to move through those areas in a way that helps us understand the sequence of those impacts. We've got some really, really interesting research here, and it gets into the biological and psychological mechanisms that are at play. So are you ready to sort of jump in and see what these sources reveal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really interesting as we start to delve into this material is how this fundamental experience of stress, something that we kind of just take for granted as part of life, it really acts like a domino effect. It triggers these responses that, we might not always connect to stress, but cascade through these different areas of our well-being.
It's not just in our heads.
Not at all. It's a whole body experience with very real consequences.
Okay, so let's start kind of chronologically with that first area that the sources explore, and that's how stress influences the aging process. I mean, I think this is something that, you and I and probably everyone listening in some way, shape, or form thinks about.
Definitely.
But, the material you sent over really highlights that aging isn't just about our genes. We inherit those, that's part of it. But stress, it seems, is a real accelerator, especially when it comes to the things like our skin, our scalp, and our hair.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the research makes a really compelling case that it's not just that psychological stress that we feel, but also what's known as oxidative stress. Both of these play a key role in how quickly we age.
Oxidative stress. Okay, so for everyone listening, can we just level set here? From what I understand, it's kind of like this. You've got these sort of harmful molecules in our bodies called reactive oxygen species, or ROS, and they're kind of like the bad guys, right?
Right.
And then we have these natural defense systems that are trying to neutralize them. But as we get older, that balance, it gets a little out of whack. The sources indicate that it gets worse, and that's when this damage at the cellular level starts to happen.
Exactly. It's kind of like rust forming on metal over
Yeah,
time.
like a slow burn. And what's interesting here is that the cellular damage, it's not just happening internally. The research actually points out that it becomes visible. It shows up, especially in our hair.
Yeah, it affects it even before the hair fully emerges. So, think about that feeling when your hair starts to feel a little thinner, more brittle, less resilient, or when you start seeing those gray hairs pop up.
Ugh, don't remind me.
Well, the research suggests that all of that is connected to oxidative stress.
So those things that we kind of associate with, just getting older, the sources are saying stress is actually kind of speeding up those processes, especially in our hair.
The evidence definitely seems to suggest that. And chronic psychological stress really seems to amplify these effects. When you're stressed out for long periods of time, your body is constantly releasing cortisol, and that disrupts essential components of your skin and scalp, like things called hyaluronan and proteoglycans, which are really important for keeping your skin and scalp, hydrated and elastic.
So that image of someone's hair turning white overnight from a sudden shock, maybe that's a bit more dramatic than reality.
Maybe a little exaggerated.
But the science, it sounds like, is really pointing to a very strong link between long-term stress and premature aging in our skin and hair.
Exactly. And it's not just about the aesthetics either, right? It's not just about how it looks. The research specifically mentions the scalp and notes that oxidative stress can actually disrupt the normal hair growth cycle. So it can affect how the hair grows, how long it stays in, and how it gets replaced. It really throws things off.
Wow, the whole system kind of goes haywire. And I imagine it's not just emotional stress we're talking about
Oh,
here.
absolutely not. Environmental factors play a big role too. Things like our own metabolism, smoking, UV radiation from the sun, and even pollution. All of these things can contribute to oxidative damage on a cellular level.
So it's kind of this double whammy of internal stress and external stressors that are all kind of beating up on our cells.
Yeah, it's a cumulative effect.
And this whole process, this stress-driven oxidative process, it doesn't just stop at our skin and hair, right? It's kind of a bigger problem for how we age overall.
Oh, absolutely. The research links chronic stress to increased levels of what are called glucocorticoids, like cortisol. And those things have a cascade of effects throughout your body, like they can impair your memory, your cognitive function. contribute to muscle loss, weaken your immune system, even affect bone density.
So it's really not just skin deep. This is like systemic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the sources even get into this really interesting area, talking about how stress can cause epigenetic changes.
Hmm.
So, our genes are kind of like our blueprint, right? And epigenetics are like the instructions that tell your body which parts of that blueprint to read and how often. Well, stress can actually change those instructions, especially for genes related to aging.
So stress is literally influencing how our genes behave.
Exactly. And that can impact our genomic stability and how well our cells function over time.
That's wild. And there was this kind of interesting, almost surprising point that came up in the material, too. Something about short-term stress maybe actually being beneficial.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's this weird paradox. So long-term chronic stress is definitely bad news. But the research suggests that little bursts of stress might actually make our cells more resilient. And it's thought that maybe this happens because stress can temporarily increase the activity of these things called molecular chaperones. They're like the quality control managers in our cells, making sure that all the proteins are being built and functioning properly.
So it's almost like a little bit of stress can kind of toughen up our cells, make them more robust, but too much for too long is definitely a problem.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance. Ultimately, the stress response, with all its hallmarks, the inflammation, the oxidative stress we've been talking about, and even problems with insulin regulation, it all kind of creates this cascade of effects that speeds up biological aging. So managing stress and mitigating that oxidative damage, those are really key for healthy aging
It all comes back to balance, doesn't it?
in so many aspects of health and wellness.
Okay, so